Hey everyone, I am back with another one of my Friday Reads videos today. I realize it's been a little while since I've posted any videos. Part of that is I guess I've just been up to some other things, haven't really had the itch to post any videos as much as I sometimes have. Part of it maybe is I've been doing a little bit more reading, so actually I've had less time thinking about and reviewing some of the books that I've been reading, but I'll have a lot to talk about here. And then, uh, and then I guess there also have been a few reviews that I've been thinking about, but haven't really fully matured yet, including one review that I was going to do. I was going to finally do this review of the Miss Marple short story collection, not by Agatha Christie, but by 12 women writers. And I recorded the whole thing, and I felt like it's almost there, but I just I don't love it. It wasn't. I think the problem is that I haven't actually read all the Miss Marple stories, so I think I'm speaking a little too authoritatively about what Miss Marple is or isn't like, but I think there are a few of the individual stories that I still might want to swap out a different, more well considered review of them. So I've been doing quite a bit of reading, and I haven't posted one of these videos in probably over 3 months at this point. So I'm just gonna start going through the stuff I read, and let me know if there's any of these you'd like to hear a longer review of, although I can't promise that I will, because some of these it's been a little while since I read, but I'm always interested to hear what you're all interested in hearing about as well. Okay, so one of the books that I finished towards the end of last year was The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century by Thomas Friedman. This is an older book. I think it came out originally around 2005 or within a few years of then. And it is kind of an iconic book by Thomas Friedman, a well known political commentator and writer of opinion pieces in the New York Times currently, and maybe for some other journals or magazines as well. Um, and in this book, I actually first heard this book, not that I really absorbed it all, but I remember hearing this book, listening to it as an audiobook in the car when I wasn't even old enough to drive myself. So just listening to, just my mom was listening to it as, I don't know if I guess it must have been a CD. It could have even been a book on tape at the time, though. Somehow it stuck around in my mind after all this time, and maybe I was just reading something by Thomas Friedman and wanted to come back and revisit this book. So um, I I found this book really interesting to read 20 years after it was published. And first of all, I have a lot of respect for Thomas Friedman. I think he's a really thoughtful guy. I'll read his commentaries that he writes that he publishes nowadays in the New York Times, for example. And this book, I think he had a lot of interesting thoughts and was asking interesting questions in this book. In the book, he basically talks about, well, the central concept is that he says that the world is flattening, which doesn't mean maybe what you think it is at first. It basically means that the world in many ways is becoming more of a global society, especially economically, but in other ways as well. And I think it was especially interesting reading this at a time, I think around the time of the presidential election in the U.S. as well, like right around that time, within a few weeks of then, where a lot of these conversations are re-arising again about like what is globalism, not what is globalism, but what are the effects of globalism for the world, and is it something that is generally a positive force, or is it something that, also whether it is a positive force or not, how does it affect people in the short term, in the long term? How does it affect different people differently? And I think Thomas Friedman takes a lot of flack sometimes nowadays for like pitching this rosy-eyed view of globalism and how it's going to do so much for the world, and how uh, his critics would say there's going to be very little blowback or opposition to globalism. And I think nowadays it's pretty clear we are seeing a lot of opposition to that globalism, and at least in the short term, not everyone is a winner under globalism. But I think Thomas Friedman actually does anticipate some of these concerns or some of these potential downsides or ways that globalism could. I don't think he necessarily characterizes globalism as inevitable and unopposed, even if he is quite optimistic about its potential and maybe more optimistic than maybe even he would be nowadays. I will say that while I found this book, I found it really interesting. I found it especially insightful to think back and a little bit quaint in some ways, thinking about like the web 2.0, or I forget what version of the web it was when he was talking about it, but thinking about some of his arguments about like things that we've clearly seen happen by now, like the flattening of the world. Like this was before social media even was really, you had internet forums, but you didn't have social media, and even like, smartphones were not really a thing at the time this was published in their current form. So the world has really flattened in a lot of the ways that he's suggested, but it's also like, it's not the most well-written book in terms of, it's just very long-winded, and it has a lot of like personal examples which are enjoyable, or are enjoyable is not the right word, are bring empathy into the situation and sort of tell people's stories. But there's so many of them, and the book does get repetitive at times, and sort of suffers from like a lack of overall structure, even though there are overall deeper points being made. So that was a little bit of a downside to this book, and I think I've said enough on it by now, or else this review is this video is going to be like hours long. So I'll move on to the next one. Okay, the next book I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I read this one at the end of last year as well. The book contains 4 different short stories. I'd say short stories, maybe like novella length stories. You could read any one of them in probably an hour or so. And the stories are about a cafe where you can go back in time, and you just have to leave before the coffee gets cold. Okay, so I like the premise of this. I think it's really interesting. I enjoyed the characterization of this cafe, and the people there, especially towards the beginning when we were first introduced to this sort of like hole in the wall cafe with these interesting characters who have been around there for a while, and this idea of like being able to go back and not change the past. You're not able to change the past, but you're able to talk with people that you had a misunderstanding with in the past or something like that. It's such a good idea, like a simple idea, but one that I think has a lot of potential to it. That said, I didn't really love this book. I think this book has a lot of good vibes to it, and I couldn't help myself feeling, these moments of warmth of just thinking about some of the kind decisions that the characters made to help one another. But it lacked some sort of... I felt like the characters and the decisions they made and the overall dilemmas, somehow they lacked some sort of depth that really would have allowed me to connect to them on a deeper level. On top of that, I didn't really feel like it was like the overall setting the scene was done really well, but it also wasn't the best written in that like the characters, a lot of the time there are these like, and I'm not like the most picky about perfect writing in the stuff that I read, but there were these constant sort of interjections where the author is telling you how the character feels about something that they're like, it's really obvious already how they feel about. And it just sort of, it pulled me out of the story a lot of the time at points where I was very immersed otherwise. And then on top of that, I think, there are all sorts of other little things about it that I found not my favorite. One of those, though, was I think some people have commented as well after reading this book that the rules of like what you're allowed to do sort of keep changing in a way that, like, if you have these rules which are laid out in the first story, that's great. Like, having constraints is good. It makes it so that only certain things can happen in the story. But then, like, the rules change it, or like have like caveats to them as you get into later stories in a way that it's like there are only four stories. It's like not quite. You've got to establish the rules before you can break them in some sort of like exceptional way. And because of that, maybe I'm just being a little bit obsessive about the rules here, but I feel like the rules were not. There was something missing that could have been better about this book if we had just stuck with the rules as they were in the first place. Okay, all in all, not something that I would necessarily recommend to other people, but it still was worth reading, especially since this is a book, actually a series that I think is quite popular. And I personally don't think I'll read the subsequent books in this collection, but yeah, I think I can see some of its charm despite not loving it myself. All right, one that I really did enjoy that I also read either towards the very end of the year or at the very beginning of this new year, 2025, was Deaf Utopia, a memoir and a love letter to a way of life by Niall DeMarco. So this one is a memoir, as it says in the title, and it was recommended to me by a family member who's been studying American Sign Language and actually attending a lot of events or like community events that involve sign language and understanding, how deaf people communicate. And I know very little about this subject, and I think this book is really a great window into the lives of the deaf community that is really fun and relatable in how the author tells the story of his growth and his journey and his awareness of learning what it means to be a deaf person in a society where hearing is often just taken as the default and just assumed. And I liked this book a lot. I think the overall, first of all, I found it very engaging, especially because the author has a lot of interesting and unique experiences, such as being on two reality shows, America's Next Top Model and Dancing with the Stars, which he does talk about in this book and are fun, but they aren't the only aspect of this book, which I think makes this, I think they add a little bit of extra dramatic excitement to the book without taking over the book. So I like that, but what I really loved about it was just the way that I really feel like this brings me into his world, and the style that it's written with, the tone that it's written with, the way that he capitalizes and phrases words in sort of a way that evokes the sign language, I don't know, the sign language words or signs in a way that, though limited in conveying them completely in the book, really keeps you from forgetting that he's communicating with others in a different way than what many of us are used to. This was all like really valuable. And then I thought he walks like this difficult line between being on one hand assertive about like deaf people are not treated well in not necessarily always by for malicious intention, but a lot of times people just forget about deaf people's needs, or kind of just assume that everything is okay for them when really they cannot understand what's going on, because of the way that those around them are communicating. And I think he does a great job of like, not only to the people in the story but also to the reader, to me, being like assertive about like, oh, it's, you shouldn't talk with deaf people, or you shouldn't say these things to deaf people because this is kind of offensive, and like implies, you know, that deaf people are incapable. He has a lot of moments like that, but he's also very light and what's the word, like very open-minded, or just like he gives readers and people in his world the benefit of the doubt without totally letting them off the hook, I guess. So I found that he's very assertive and empathetic in this way, and it made it such a joy to read his story and to learn a little bit about this this community and this way of living that are part of our broader community as a whole. All right, another one that I read recently is The Scout Mindset: Why Some People See Things Clearly and Others Don't, by Julia Galef. I heard about this one on David Gosley's channel a few years ago, and then I heard about it again from my brother, recommended it to me. I guess he recommended to me a bunch of books towards the end of last year as well. And this is a really easy book to read. I think I actually read the whole thing in one day. It's pretty short, and it's one of those books that's written in a way where, like, even being pretty short, it also, like, it's chunked in sections where it's just, you know, it's made to be read quickly and processed. Like, the central idea in this book is that, or the central idea in this book, the way the author thinks about it, is that we, in different situations in our lives, we can either have a soldier mindset or a scout mindset. And the soldier mindset involves basically, you have an idea about something and you try to, you think about a question or a belief that you have in terms of, can I believe this? And basically, it's a soldier, and the reason it's called a soldier mindset is because it involves defending beliefs that you already have. So you have some preconceived beliefs about an idea. People you view people as challenging them, or you receive information, maybe not even from people, that challenges that belief, and you basically consider that evidence with a mindset of, is this something that I have to believe, or is this something that, do I have to change my view of the world to fit this new information? And basically treat it as if, like, the preferred outcome is to hold on to your belief, and only if it really is completely incompatible would you change it. Whereas a scout mindset is less attached to your beliefs and is willing to change them, and is looking to take in new evidence and new ideas and incorporate them into your current beliefs. So from a full scout mindset, you would have beliefs based on the evidence that you have so far about the world, and then you hear new information, like maybe there's a person, a public figure that you like a lot, and then you hear something sort of negative about them, and instead of saying like, oh, I really like that person, I don't believe that they would have done that, like, you take that into your evaluation as well. And maybe you don't immediately just change everything and be like, oh, I hate that person now, but you sort of think about, like, okay, like, do I believe this information in terms of, like, what I know, and should I update my beliefs about, you know, this person or this issue, you know, political issue, or this, you know, way of understanding the world around me. And obviously, based on the title of this book, it's pretty obvious that the author views the scout mindset as the way to go. I don't really love the title of this book. Why some people see things clearly and others don't, because it feels like almost a little bit antagonistic to me. But I think that the book is written from a good place and really is just trying to encourage people to adopt more of a scout mindset, and particularly even if you're. I think people who read this book likely will have a scout mindset in many regards already, or in many spheres of their life, but I think we all have that soldier mindset in at least some parts of our lives. And while the book doesn't really, I think, go deep enough or get enough into some of the nuances about like when might it be useful for us to adopt a soldier mindset, like is a scout mindset really always the way to go? While I feel like it didn't really go into quite enough depth as I would have liked, it was still kind of like interesting to hear this overall idea, and that's probably an idea that I'll hear referenced again at some point in the future. So I think worth a read. I also felt like, because I didn't feel like this was a super revolutionary or super wildly new way of viewing the world. I think there are like the way of framing it is slightly different than other framings that I've heard before. So kind of just a different metaphor, or I don't know what the word is for scout mindset, soldier mindset, a different conceptualization of how to think about the world. But it kind of felt like something that I would have gotten a lot of value out of if I read it like when I was a high schooler, or maybe in college. But at this point, it kind of felt like, oh, okay, yeah, I pretty much think about the world in this way already. And I'm not saying that just because like I'm perfectly scout mindset, or that I even necessarily want to be perfectly scout mindset about everything. Like I have my weaknesses, but I think I'm already kind of aware that I'm at least trying to find those weaknesses and have that scout mindset, even if I haven't thought of it as such. So yeah, the scout mindset. Next book, The Accidental Empress by Alison Pataki. This is an interesting change of pace from the other ones that I've been reading. It's a historical fiction about Empress Elizabeth of the Habsburg Empire, also known as Sisi. Pretty light reading. Overall, it's a bit of a, I guess you could say it's like a historical romance fiction. But I mean, I'm not really much of a romance reader in general. In I guess what I think of as romance fiction, and this is, I think that this is more leans more heavily into the historical fiction aspect than the romance aspect, although you do get some elements of romance as well. And the book is about how Cece accidentally ended up marrying Franz Josef, the emperor, the last emperor of the, well, not exactly the last emperor, but effectively like the last long-term emperor of the Habsburg Empire, or the Austrian Empire in the 1800s. And I like this book a lot. I think I liked it partly because it was sort of a supplement to some other historical reading I was doing on the Habsburgs, and I wasn't too concerned about like the historical accuracy of every little detail. I wasn't taking it as the historical truth or anything, and I was willing to forgive. Like, I think in general the writing was pretty well done. I mean, some people have pointed out, oh, the characters were like a little bit more, some of them were a little bit too much of caricatures or too much villainized versus others, which is stuff that I can totally understand why people would criticize. I can totally understand why people might take objection to, like, if there's certain political situations or just like historical events that are portrayed unrealistically or speculatively. But I was okay with all of that, and I really thought I enjoyed it as a supplement and kind of like a more lighthearted, or not lighthearted, more casual reading along with this other book, very quite academic book that I was reading at the same time, which is The Habsburg Empire, A New History by Peter M. Judson. So this is a book that I actually started last year. I started early last year, so like over a year ago, and followed it for a while, like maybe a quarter of the book, and then just kind of lost interest in it. But I came back to it this year still wanting to return to it and give it another shot. And I did make it through this time. I think it's a little challenging for a reader like myself who's not a historian well versed in this area, because it's kind of dry and academic a lot of the way through. It is like, I think it is a really valuable piece of research, of academic work, of thinking about the history of the Habsburg Empire in a different way. And that's another point of why I think it's probably more valuable for some others than myself. Because although on one hand, I get what Peter Judson is doing here, he is responding to the way that the Habsburg Empire has been viewed historically, and certain implications that has. And instead, he's sort of writing this revisionist history that views the empire less critically as like doomed to fail because it was an empire and because it was multicultural and because it united all these people of different backgrounds. And you can see how these aspects reflected in modern politics may have, good aspects and bad aspects to them. But by doing this, he's trying to basically challenge some of what he sees as flawed or notions that are missing some of the bigger picture about like what the Habsburg Empire did for the people in it. He acknowledges that it had failures. He also highlights that there were successes to the Habsburg Empire. And at the end of the day, I think he feels pretty positively about not everything about the Habsburg Empire, but the fact that it's an empire that for over 100 years was able to unite different groups of people with different nationalities, different languages. And by the way, nationalities was like sort of a made up or like artificial term, because he talks in the book about how like the idea of a nationality came a lot from people being told that their nationality was based on what language they spoke, or sometimes from geographical areas or things like that. But you can see how Peter Judson is critical of this way of viewing the empire, and in particular viewing it as failing due to its heterogeneity, because this has implications for what happened after the Habsburg Empire. A lot of the after the Habsburg Empire fell following World War I, there was a lot of increase in nationalism, and we entered into this era. Admittedly, I'm not enough of a historian to really be able to speak broadly about what happened in any authoritative way, but we entered into this era where nationality became a bigger and bigger force, and in particular, in Nazi Germany, it became a centerpiece of the Nazi movement, and obviously that had its own downsides to it, not just in Nazi Germany, but in other countries and regions as well. All in all, I think that this is a really valuable piece of research and of work synthesizing a lot of different historical resources about the empire and trying to sort of bring together the empire's story into one. But I wouldn't really recommend it to most readers like myself, especially not as a starting point on the topic. I think it would have been valuable for me to read if I'd had a little bit more of a background. Okay, it still was valuable for me, but it was more challenging and maybe not the most valuable thing I could have read to understand what the Habsburg Empire actually was. But there are a lot of interesting ideas explored here. And I think actually, if this idea is interesting to you at all, I would actually recommend instead, not instead, but at least first, checking out a YouTube video. For example, he has a lecture on this topic that he gave that is like an hour long that you can listen to, and that I find, without going into every single detail of his book, kind of summarizes some of his main points, in particular some of this discussion about nationalism, and ties it into modern society and modern geopolitics, looking at the European Union as an example. And I thought that was really interesting for seeing how his research has bearings on how we look at the world and understand the world today. Okay, next book was Civilization and Its Discontents by Sigmund Freud. I read this one with Davude's reading and discussion group. It's a pretty short one overall. It took maybe a few hours to read. I really enjoyed it. I haven't really read anything by Freud, and maybe I'm a little bit skeptical of Freud just by nature. Not entirely, but just knowing his reputation for having a wide variety of different ideas. Some of them I think very influential in a way that has lasted and had a lot of has greatly influenced like how we think about psychology today, and in other ways that are like just a little bit bizarre, which we do see some of those in this short essay or book as well. But I enjoy this a lot. I think it's I don't know if I should say it's a decent introduction to Freud, because I haven't really read a lot of Freud stuff. And this focuses on, I think, different questions than what a lot of Freud's work focuses on. But I think it's interesting just how Freud was thinking about a lot of the problems 100 years ago that people are still thinking about today. And I mean problems like, is all this progress and technological advancement that we see, is it really making the world better, or is it just changing it? And is it forcing people into a box that's like against their nature in a way that is harmful to them? And I think Freud sort of explores the idea that in a lot of ways, like civilization, the act of civilizing people and making them work together in a society, it does involve making sort of sacrifices or just like regulating the way that we behave in a totally natural environment, but towards something greater, or towards something that maybe in the sum total across all the people in the world could actually have more positive benefits. Not that that's necessarily inherently true of any civilization you build, but it's sort of an aspiration of civilization. And he explores this question of like, how can people really be happy in a civilized world that necessitates removing some of these freedoms in a way, like denying some of their inherent instincts towards the betterment of a society as a whole. Really interesting work. He does get into some of his own psychological theories later in the book in a way that I think it gets into a little bit more of the more Freud that I'm a little bit more skeptical of, where some of the theories or explanations that he comes up with don't necessarily seem like, to me, the most natural or most plausible way of thinking about things. But all in all, really enjoyable and really interesting, thinking about how people were viewing some of these problems 100 years ago. All right, another one that I read maybe a month or two ago was The Sirens Call, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource by Chris Hayes, who hosted a show, or maybe still hosts a show, on MSNBC. I learned about this book because Chris Hayes was a guest on the Ezra Klein show, which I listen to often, and his interview I thought was really interesting. It was about how attention is a resource that nowadays is often even more valuable than money, and how in this particular show, they were discussing how figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk are often maybe perceived as being powerful, among other things, because they have a lot of money. But really, other people, there are others who have a lot of money and do not possess the same sort of influence. And a lot of this influence that they have comes from their being attentionally rich, or essentially able to captivate people's attention, to make people look in the first place, and then to keep people looking once they've looked, which is not an easy thing to do. And it's especially not easy in the world that we live in nowadays, because there's so much competition for our attention. So this general idea, you don't have to necessarily be interested in the Elon Musk and Donald Trump attention grabbing capacity to be interested in this overall idea. I think all of us, including just watching a YouTube video, are thinking about making constant choices about where to put our attention and what's worth paying attention to. But I think this overall idea of attention as a limited resource, and a resource that is very scarce nowadays, and sometimes even more valuable than money in certain ways, and that is maybe being taken from us against our will. I mean, I think it's hard to say exactly what that means, but definitely attention, we feel that our attention can be grabbed or taken from us, is a really interesting concept, thinking about what that means. And I think a lot of people have a feeling that their attention, their ability to concentrate on one thing, is not necessarily always affected for the better by all of the social media distractions and all of the public distractions that we have competing for our attention, even if any one of those might be interesting or valuable in itself. So, really valuable interview on the Ezra Klein show, which I'd recommend listening to if you're interested in this topic. I didn't really find that the book was as insightful or added a lot more. And in fact, sometimes I think it did reduce what is a really interesting topic to more sort of like quick jabs at people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Like, it may be interesting to investigate them from an attentional, through like a lens of this attention commanding perspective, but I felt like the discussion that they had on the show was more insightful than anything that the author had to say about those figures in particular in this whole book. And also that the discussion on the show was, I think, a little bit more open-minded about what that means, and not like kind of assuming that the reader is just going to eat up anything that is critical of Elon Musk, So in short, I think there's probably other books on the attention economy. Like, the author references many such books in this book of his own. And I think that from what I got, this is a topic that's been discussed a lot and that has been researched a lot. And I'm not really sure that the author added a whole lot on top of it, besides, just talking about a few of his own personal experiences of what it means to be seeking attention as a host of a show on MSNBC. But definitely a topic that I'm interested in exploring further. Okay, They Do It With Mirrors. I did read an Agatha Christie book in the past month or so, and that was the 5th Miss Marple book, They Do It With Mirrors. I'm not sure how popular this one is overall among Christie's fans, but I liked it quite a bit. I actually solved it more or less. I would like to do a review on this one at some point. I know I haven't actually reviewed book 4 of the Marple series yet, although that one also is one that I'd like to review. But yeah, this is a really... it's a different setting for Agatha Christie mystery. It's at a sort of juvenile detention center where, there's a house, and then the wealthy owners of this house have this reform center for young boys on the side, where they're sort of philanthropists of the sort who believe that these boys as I think many people believe nowadays as well, that these boys have behaved badly and have done criminal things because of the way that they were raised, and that they maybe have potential to improve into better people. So that is kind of an interesting thing on the side for much of the story that isn't maybe always totally central to the story, but feels not totally irrelevant to the story either. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting change, new enough for me so that it didn't just feel like another, yet another, like, oh, there's a country house and, some people get murdered there, and, there's the cook and the baker and the candlestick maker, and which one of them was it? I guess it's butcher, baker, candlestick maker is the actual rhyme. But anyway, I enjoyed the book. I think it had its flaws, so I can understand why people wouldn't necessarily like this one. But for me, those flaws weren't really enough to bring it. Like, some of them were fairly large flaws, and I'll talk about that in my review when I do it, but it wasn't big enough flaws that I actually really liked the novel much less for it, which was nice, because I think this one was the first Marple that I read in a while, and actually one that I quite enjoyed and that got me excited to read the next Marple, which I actually am doing right now. I am on currently about halfway through Pocket Full of Rye. And then one last book that I finished last week, I suppose, and am also looking to do a review on at some point. Can't promise that I ever will, but I'm hoping to, is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. So this is the final of the Jane Austen novels, the 6 Jane Austen novels that I have read. So now I have completed all of them, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was great. I also thought it was possibly my least favorite of the Jane Austen novels, which I do not mean as a slight to this novel at all, because Jane Austen is such a talented writer and writes such good stories that I have quite enjoyed every single one of her books, and this one was no exception. I think there are probably some reasons why I found this one a little bit less enjoyable, which I can get into in that review. And I hate even saying less enjoyable, because I really enjoyed this the whole time. I found it very easy to read. I think, though, that the novel is there's just a little bit less of I don't even want to say less of the drama, because there is drama, but like, it's a little bit less sensational, I guess, than some of her other novels. Like, it doesn't have the same punch to it that some of the characters in Pride and Prejudice have, which I think is a very, very accessible novel. And I wouldn't really recommend someone reading Mansfield Park as their first Jane Austen work, even though I do think it is as clearly a Jane Austen work and as good a showcase of her ability as any of her works. But yeah, looking forward to doing a review on this one. I can't say that I am totally ready to do that review yet, but I did immediately after finishing the book collect a lot of my thoughts and just take some notes so that I would remember my first impressions, and then hopefully be able to say a little bit more about that shortly. Okay, that is what I've been reading in the past few months. I guess I'll say a couple things about what else I'm reading right now that hopefully I'll be able to talk about in a future video. On the Edge by Nate Silver. I've been kind of speeding through and really enjoying this book. I still am not exactly sure what it's about, even though I'm like 20% of the way through. I do know what it's about. It's about risk-taking and how calculated risk-taking and a personality of calculated risk-taking influences, especially nowadays, influences people's success in various endeavors, including investment or politics or social situations, I suppose, or poker, that's why I say I don't know exactly what the book is about yet, because so far it is about poker. It is about calculated risk-taking and how that intersects a little bit with personality or with like emotional regulation within the game of poker. But I'm not not entirely sure yet how that's going to connect to the rest of the book that's coming up. Also reading White Teeth by Zadie Smith. That's my fiction, my non-mystery fiction right now. Enjoying that a lot as well. I'm just getting started on that one, but Zadie Smith is really such a gifted writer. I just feel like I don't know where the story is going yet. I'm, really just at the very start of it, like in the third chapter. But like you can open up to a random page in this book and just start reading, and it will be like really witty and entertaining, like in such a delightful way, and feel very real. And she brings in so many different, like she has this brilliant view of like she understands so many different characters within the community of London, which is where this novel takes place, various backgrounds and how they might think about the world and interact with one another in ways that are often comedic, but have big impacts on their lives and the lives of the people who will follow them. So really enjoying that one, and it's been on my list for a while, so I'm so excited to finally be actually picking it up and reading it. And then there's Pocket Full of Rye by Agatha Christie, which I mentioned already that I was reading and should be done with that one pretty fast. I'm enjoying it as well. It's a little bit more of, I want to say it's a little bit more of like your straightforward murder mystery. Not straightforward is like a loaded word. It's a little bit more typical, like the setting and the characters are a little bit more typical. But I'm really enjoying it as well. I am finding it pretty complicated. I can't say that I really have a great idea of what's going on. I do think it's going to end up being a more complicated mystery than they do it with Mirrors. Not that that was a bad mystery by any means, but I think that one had it was a little bit easier for me to tell what was going on. Whereas here, there are really a lot of possibilities and still just starting to really develop. The plot is thickening, you could say. Anyway, I hope you have actually made it this far and enjoyed listening to what I've been reading. Feel free to share what you've been reading as well. I hope you've been reading some good stuff at the beginning of this year, and looking forward to hopefully doing some dedicated reviews on these videos soon. So until next time, happy reading.